Hello Internet, and welcome to another episode of Experimental Cataclysm, the show where we talk about recent changes to the experimental version of Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. Now I only have 6 or 7 things to talk about this week, and honestly I don't have very much to say about them. So yeah, it just seemed like there was fewer changes this time around, so it is what it is. First up today, we have a pretty simple change from Night. This addressed how hallucinations of electric-type creatures will work in the game. Apparently, previously, if you had one of these hallucinations, the electric attacks from those enemies could brick your electronics. This PR makes it so that imaginary creatures can no longer drop an EMP on you and damage your electronics. Obviously, this makes a lot of sense, and it does seem like a simple change, but I can't imagine, how frustrating that must have been for players who would experience that. Next up today from Drew, we've got Chemistry PPE. This is personal protective equipment, things like gloves, eyewear, etc. that are pretty standard requirements for real-life chemistry. Apparently, many of our recipes have some amount of danger attached to them, and so to mitigate that danger, you would wear this equipment. Now, this also has the side benefit of allowing us to roleplay as Breaking Bad, something, Jesse, we have to cook. These are broken down into 4 groups. There are gloves, eye protection, gas protection, and skin protection, and the groups contain exactly what you would expect them to contain. Eye protection is a bunch of goggles, gloves are gloves, etc. Now it is worth noting here that larger garments like the hazmat suit can satisfy multiple categories at once since they cover more of your body. Now I looked around to see if they were added as requirements to recipes, but I couldn't find anything about that as of the time of this recording. So as far as I know, none of these have yet taken effect. They are not required, but this is something you should expect in the nearest future, or maybe even by the time this video goes up on YouTube. These protective items will be treated as other tool requirements in the game. This means that recipes won't have to list out every single piece of protection. It just calls on these groups, and then you can use any relevant item to fulfill the requirement. And you probably already know how that works from playing the game. Anyway, yeah, I like seeing this. Some of our chemistry recipes are indeed dangerous, and I don't know, just pretend I made another Breaking Bad reference and we all laughed about it. Next up today, we've got a pair of changes that will impact the way you deal with bleeding in the game. First up, from Joshua CF, we've got a change to tourniquets that fixed a bug. Previously, if you had wound care or wound care expert those proficiencies, you actually would be worse at using tourniquets. Apparently, they could only stop 1/3 of bleeds rather than 2/3 of bleeds, and since tourniquets already only work on your limbs and not your head or your torso, obviously, then that really knocked down how relevant they were in the game. So this seems like a simple bug fix, and yeah, good stuff. This should make them noticeably better at stopping bleeding wounds. And then the second PR here is from Vanera, and it fixed some broken behavior around staunching bleeding wounds with your hands. So this is a little bit of a lesser known mechanic. I don't know if everyone knows about this. If you're not familiar, if you're not wielding anything and you pass a turn without moving while you have a bleeding wound, then your character will attempt to stop that bleeding by applying pressure using their hands. When this was first introduced, people talked about how incredible and powerful and oh golly gee, what a fantastic way of stopping bleeding. But in my opinion, yes, it makes sense for this mechanic to exist, but it's only valuable for very low tier bleeding. And honestly, you can mostly ignore very low tier bleeds in the first place. They will stop on their own. But anyway, that's the mechanic. Some people love it. I never use it. I don't like dropping what I have in my hands. However, the mechanic was apparently pretty badly broken. First of all, your healthcare skill scaled up your ability to stop bleeding. This is kind of silly. A doctor, for instance, pressing his hands on a wound is going to be roughly as effective as a janitor pressing his hands onto a wound. It doesn't really make sense for this to scale so dramatically with your healthcare skill, and so that scaling was removed. And yes, I'm probably going to get someone who comments saying, oh, well, a doctor would actually know a better way to apply pressure. Look, that's not the point. The point is that it's not a significant impact on how good you would staunch a wound. The maximum intensity was also reduced, so you can no longer clamp a hand on your arterial bleed and effectively stop the flow. Well, actually, I don't think it was that significant. I don't think you could stop arterial spray previously, but there is now a lower cap on how severe a bleed can be that can actually be stopped by staunching with your hands. And I probably will get another comment here. Someone's going to say, well, you could pinch the artery and stop arterial bleeding or stick your finger in it. Look, it was too much and it's been nerfed back a little bit. Just calm down. Man, I'm so jaded by YouTube. I'm actually arguing with people before they say anything. That's a sign of something, right? That can't be good. And then finally, tourniquets will increase the effectiveness of your staunching. I think this mechanic already existed previously for bandages as well. In other words, let's say that you rip open an artery in your leg. Well, that's not great, and slapping your hands onto that wound isn't going to do much of anything. But if you first apply a tourniquet to that leg, you are slowing down the blood flow considerably. If you then clamp your hands or bandages onto this wound, well, you might actually be able to get the bleed to stop or get it to clot or whatever. Now, these things probably would not have worked initially with a gaping, spurting wound, but slowing down the blood flow with the tourniquet first enables the lower tier options to be more effective. Anyway, yeah, fair bit in these PRs here, especially the second one there from Vanera. Bleeding in general is still in a bit of a wonky place. Bandages, for example, are still a bit too close in their effectiveness, so they tend to be functionally the same for the purposes of stopping blood. Similarly, someone recently pointed out that cocaine topical cream stops bleeding as well. Now, it is true that cocaine is used as a local anesthetic and it does affect blood vessels, and of course it was used in a medical capacity in the past, and it still is in very niche circumstances. However, the effectiveness of this cream on bleeds in the game is actually the same as hemostatic powder. Hemostatic powder is a real life thing that is used to quickly clot very badly bleeding wounds, whereas topical cocaine is used to gently numb areas and slightly constrict blood vessels. Right, so anyway, point is that bleeding is still pretty jank, but thanks to these PRs, it's a little less jank than it was, and that's a good thing. And the takeaway here is that maybe you should start carrying topical cocaine with you because, hey, why not? It's just one more fun thing you can do in the Cataclysm. Next up today from Candleberry, we've got a PR that adds proper spawn points for scenarios. So a little behind the scenes here, scenarios in this game do not actually let you specify where on the map the character will spawn. If you start in the evac shelter, you're just in the evac shelter. The game doesn't let you choose a tile for the player to spawn on. Now, for many locations, this does not matter at all. It doesn't really matter if you start next to the evac shelter computer or if you're on a bench in that building, as long as you're in the building. However, in other scenarios, it would be nice to be able to specify a tile. Maybe in the mall, we want you to start in a specific store, or maybe in the restaurant start, we want to put you in the walk-in freezer, say you barricaded yourself in there, whatever blah blah, flavor text. Well, now, thanks to this PR, Candleberry has added this ability. We can now specify a zone in a map to be designated as a spawn location. From a player perspective, this currently doesn't mean very much. It was initially made for Aftershock, a specific scenario in Aftershock, but it does open up options in the future, and ideally, we'll see people using this to touch up our existing starting scenario locations. I just wanted to mention this because it was a question that I asked in the past and was told like, hey, no, sorry, we can't specify a spawn location. And now we can. So yeah, this is actually a pretty fantastic change, even if it doesn't directly impact your game at the moment. And for those of you who watch this that are contributors, you might have missed this PR, which it's a cool thing that I would like to see people take advantage of. Next up today from Onura, we've got some updates to the farm supply store. Now, I wanted to mention this for two reasons. First of all, we talked about this in a previous show and I offered a lot of feedback on the location, and it's nice when people take feedback well and implement change. I respect that. I like when people take feedback. And then the other reason I wanted to mention it is because I felt like a jerk after that video. I rambled on a fair bit about the location, probably more than I should have, and then the author even commented on the video. Now, this is a little digression, but look, it's weird. I make these videos, I talk about changes, but I still don't really expect people to pay attention to me. And so sometimes I ramble on or am a bit harsh because I sort of forget that contributors watch the video and I'm actually criticizing things that people put a lot of work into. And then sometimes I look at a video and it gets 3,000 views or whatever and I'm like, wow, 3,000 people just watched me be a dick. Anyway, so I just wanted to mention this. The PR says that rather than being more or less completely looted as they were previously, the things that will now be looted are the high value items. Instead of fencing and animal feed and other undesirable items all being completely gone, the stuff that's missing now will be the high value items. So camping gear, firearms, things with immediate and significant value in an apocalypse. And that's pretty much perfectly how it should be or what it would actually be in real life, I think. I have no objections to guns being missing. Many of these stores sell firearms, and they would indeed be the thing that you would loot first in a zombie apocalypse. And the same is true for panic buying, really. If there's rumblings of a zombie apocalypse, well, these places sell a lot of cheap long guns that often don't require in-depth licensing. So like, yeah, these are the exact things that people would buy up. The same is true for camping gear, like hexamine stoves, propane tanks. Those sort of things would be what your average panic buyer or zombie refugee fleeing to the countryside, that's exactly what they would want to take with them. So yeah, I think these changes are ultimately good, and I think they track a lot better with realism. And again, sorry for being long-winded and whiny about this the first time around. Next up today from P. Shep Jr., we've got some tweaks to the retirement community map gen / starting scenario. Now, if I recall correctly, they did touch up this location once before, and of course, in addition to them being the person who added this in the first place, this round of edits sought to make the location just generally harder than it was previously and add some more lore or world buildy type stuff. I still have not given this scenario a proper playthrough, so I'm just going off what is mentioned in the PR. I'm not sure how easy or hard it was previously. However, based on feedback and their personal take, they've decided to add more enemies to the location, particularly to the southern part of map gen. Now again, I'm not really familiar. I assume those of you who have been playing in this location will know whatever that means. Additionally, there was some information added to a computer in this location to provide some flavor and background information for the map. There are also now signs at the retirement community and the nursing home. The implication here is that adding a sign to the Shady Hills nursing home will help differentiate it from standard nursing homes. But to be honest, I either didn't know or else completely forgot that there even were other nursing homes, so like that's news to me. But anyway, yeah, some polish here, and the starting scenario should be a bit more challenging than it was previously. This might merit a revisit, or hey, if you're like me and you haven't even tried it yet, this seems like a good time. And then finally today, we've got the addition of 4 horse mutants from Dave 2700, or David, or David, I guess I don't know, apologies. These 4 horse mutants are based around the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Man, I'm having a hard time saying these names, but they are the Pestilent Horse, Sinewy War Horse, Smoldering Stallion, and the Pale Charger. The Pestilent Horse has acid blood and an acid-spitting attack, so pretty standard stuff there. This is the Spitter ability, the inaccurate attack that drops a pretty big pile of acid in a zone around wherever the projectile lands. Now normally to deal with a spitter, you would stay back, let them spit at you from far away where they will most likely miss, and then move in and murder the enemy. So you would probably try to do this with the horse as well, but the problem is that the horse is a pretty fast lad. This makes it pretty difficult to keep this creature at range and wait for it to spit. And if it gets up in your face, you're going to end up surrounded by acid, and it will be pretty bad indeed. Now on the plus side, this appears to only show up in the game from a zombie horse evolving. In other words, you will not see these in the early game at all, so you will have time to equip yourself before you start seeing them around, and they won't be spawning very commonly in town or anything like that. They only evolve from zombie horses. Moving on, the Sinewy War Horse is basically just a brute. It has the brute knockback ability, which can throw you into walls or furniture or whatever. It also regenerates 10% of its HP per turn. Now I'm usually pretty skeptical about regen, but to be honest, I guess I don't know too much about what is over the top and what's not enough. In my opinion, 10% per turn seems like a huge amount. By comparison, the Disilluted Devourer only regenerates less than 1% of its health per turn. Naked Mole Rats regen around 8% per turn. But yeah, anyway, those are just, some other numbers. I'm sure you have your own opinion about what would be a good amount here. The difference between those other creatures and this horse here is that it doesn't really have any armor and it only has 90 HP. So it is something you could probably dispatch pretty easily, especially because they're going to appear a little later in the game when you will have most likely a proper weapon or firearm. Moving on, the Smoldering Stallion is a smoker, trailing smoke and popping into a smoke explosion upon its death. And then the Pale Charger is the skeletonized version, so it has pretty hefty armor values like the other bone-plated enemies in the game. All 4 of the horses are quite fast indeed. I think that's probably going to be the main source of difficulty with these creatures. Having the spitter on top of you at all times is going to lead to you standing in acid. Having the smoker move so fast leads to you choking in a hazy cloud, etc, etc. Overall, I think these creatures are fine. The speed is something to be aware of, but they're limited in existence to upgrades of zombie horses, and yeah. I will say that the pale charger, i.e. the skeleton-y one, it does have the hard to shoot flag, and we've talked about that previously. It's a flag that you add to a creature that makes that creature one size smaller when calculating firearm accuracy. This is a feature that is present on the skeletal juggernaut, for example, something I've complained about previously. I don't understand why these huge entities are regarded as hard to hit. It does not make sense to me, but in this circumstance, it was most likely just a copy-paste from another skeleton-type creature. But both the skeletal juggernaut and the pale charger here are large entities. They would not be hard to shoot, and I think this is a thing that maybe should not exist. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, those are my thoughts on these fine equine lads. And then before we wrap up for the day, I did want to address a question I keep seeing. People continually ask me if I know when 0.G will release or how far along the project is. And to be honest, I have no idea. This is a friendly reminder that I'm not part of the dev team, and for the most part, I don't even interact with people on GitHub. Or like, sometimes people think I have a special in with the devs, but really I don't. I know about these things at roughly the same time you know about these things. I do pay attention to GitHub and might know before some of you, but also I don't have inside information. There is still a 0.G project listed on GitHub, and there have been myriad bug fixes and updates that move us closer towards the next stable release. In reality though, nobody knows when that's going to happen. We are still in feature freeze, but we've been in feature freeze for months now, a lot longer than we were for the last couple of releases, at least as far as I recall. And despite that, we've had quite a few additions that I personally consider features, so it's obviously a pretty loose restriction. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that people continually ask me about it, and my answer is that I have no idea. I of course will mention it when it happens, but alas, I am in the dark just like everyone else. With that though, I think we're done with the video for today. If you enjoyed the video, well great, that's exactly what it's here for. And if you hated this video, well that's okay too, because I designed it that way specifically to upset you. Thank you for watching, and I of course will be back in a couple of weeks with the next episode, so I'll see you next time.